Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. Ellie, thank you. If you can stay on that slide for a second, that would be great. Thank you, Ellie. So thanks everyone for taking the time to join us this evening for this virtual webinar on the Somer Valley Enterprise Zone, which I will refer to going forward as SVEZ because it's rather quicker than referring to it as the Somer Valley Enterprise Zone. My name is Richard Holden. I am the Operations Manager for Bath and Somer Valley Enterprise Zone, and I am the Council's project lead on the Somer Valley. This webinar is the start of a 6-week period of public engagement on our proposals for the Somer Valley Enterprise Zone. There will be lots of other opportunities to learn about the scheme, to ask questions and to provide feedback. There is a project website which has gone live this afternoon and which contains further information and includes an online questionnaire, and we will provide details of how you can access this later in the presentation. Later in the year, there will be another opportunity for you to comment on proposals when the formal consultation takes place as the LDO comes forward. That's the local development order. More on that in a moment. That term will be explained. During this engagement, as well as the webinar and the website, we'll also be displaying information boards at a number of local locations, including Midsummer Norton Library from tomorrow, the 20th of May, and also at Radstock Library from the 24th of May. Information will also be available at Porton Library from tomorrow, although that won't be information board, it will be hard copy information. So hard copies of the online questionnaire will also be available in those locations, as well as a box to provide feedback. May I remind attendees that this meeting is currently being recorded and will be placed on the project website on the council's YouTube channel, so that people can view it afterwards if they wish. Only the panel will be visible. We have already received some questions and we are happy to answer any questions that you may have. So should you wish to ask anything, please add it to the chat facility and we will answer it after the presentation is concluded. Officers will be monitoring the chat facility throughout the meeting, so please don't feel concerned that your questions will be lost because they will be responded to. If we're not able to respond to all the questions asked this evening because we run out of time, we will provide written responses which will be circulated to all attendees of the webinar and also uploaded onto our project website. It's expected that this presentation will last approximately 45 to 50 minutes, leaving a good period of time for questions. We will aim to conclude the webinar at 8:30. So I've introduced myself, I'm Richard Holden. Let me now introduce our panel. This evening, we have our multidisciplinary team led by Arcadis, and you'll be hearing from Kevin Hunt, who is a director at Jones Lang LaSalle Planning, Carl Burford, who is a director at AHR Architects, and from Ed Whitney, who is an Arcadis director. Also present is Richard Dayone, who is the deputy head of planning. So this evening, we'll also be, in terms of what we're looking to cover off, we'll cover off the reasons why we're intervening in the Somer Valley. What is an LDO? That's a term that I've mentioned, but what does it actually mean? What does a local development order mean? We'll be looking at the proposed master plan and how we've built up that master plan. And also we'll be looking at transport interventions and the project timeline. And then at the very end, as I said already, there'll be opportunities to comment and to feedback. Ellie, may I have the next slide, please? Thanks very much. So just a quick introduction for those of you who aren't aware of where the Somer Valley is located. It's defined by this red line on the map. The enterprise zone is a proposed new area of commercial development where the council is aiming to deliver a local hub for business, new businesses and employment. It's located very close to the Tesco superstore you can see, and also to the Old Mills industrial estate, trading estate that sits just to the south. And you'll see the Somer Valley Enterprise Park and the Wicks retail warehouse adjacent just to the east of the enterprise zone. It's located at Old Mills, as I'm just saying. It's a 13.5 hectare site on the western edge of Midsummer Norton. And over the course of this engagement, we're seeking comments from the local community, which will help shape the scheme. Next slide, please, Ellie. So why do we need to intervene? We're looking to provide new jobs for local people. encouraging sustainable economic growth in the Somer Valley. Those new jobs will help to reduce out-commuting, reducing carbon emissions and congestion. That's one of the issues that we've been really key to try to resolve going forward. We'll also be looking to encourage business and employment growth by providing new commercial floor space, which I've already mentioned, about 40,000 square meters, which is about 430,000 square feet in the enterprise zone. The site's been allocated for employment development since about 2007, and the council's intervention is needed as the development has not been brought forward by the private sector, and that's very much linked to the fact that the enabling costs to bring the site forward are pretty considerable, and have led to essentially market failure in bringing forward the scheme in any other way. Somer Valley is designed to be delivered to deliver a sustainable economic engine in the Somer Valley. It's responding also to a lack of ready supply of sustainable commercial space, and it's also looking to respond to the climate and ecological emergencies declared by the council. An LDO is a different way to promote the site and unlock delivery that the EZ status enables. The economic drivers are even more important now as we come out of the pandemic and also respond to the current global pressures that exist. SVES also forms part of a broad package of intervention in the Somer Valley. We as a council are looking at delivering the Heritage Action Zone in Midsummer Norton Town Centre, which is another economic stimulus, delivering market stalls and a new market hall in the town hall. We're also looking at delivering the high street renewal programme in Midsummer Norton Town Centre, which involves looking at improvements to shop frontages and also to the public realm link between the South Road car park and the high street. We're also intervening and working with locally to deliver the Radstock Healthy Living Centre, which is a new surgery and family centre on the boundary between Radstock and also we're looking to deliver the Somer Valley Rediscovered, which is a green infrastructure programme, really looking at active travel throughout the Somer Valley and trying to get people to look to more active travel modes in terms of walking and cycling in particular. I think that's probably enough for me at the moment. I'm going to hand over now to Kevin Hunt, who will just take you on to the next couple of slides. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Richard. Good evening, everybody. So as Richard's referred to, the SVES is allocated in the Baines core strategy under policy SSB9 as part of the old Mills industrial estate, and the local plan partial review seeks to take that forward, that allocation forward, and indeed extend the allocation to cover all of the land that you'll see as part of the LDO proposals today. So it's clear from a planning policy context that there is support for the delivery of employment floor space and job creation opportunities on the land which is part of the LDO. And as part of that, we're seeking to deliver approximately 1,300 new jobs, and that would be around 40,000 square meters of commercial floor space. We'll come back to how that works on the site a little later in the presentation. SVES is also identified as an enterprise zone, which was approved by the government in 2017, which again seeks to demonstrate the support for economic development and job creation as part of the SVES proposals. Next slide, please. So I've been asked to just briefly talk to you about what a local development order is. In technical terms, what it does is provide approval or permitted development rights for certain types of development to be built on the site. It effectively sets a planning framework which determines what can be built, the type of uses that can be provided on site, and the extent of development in terms of height and total floor area. What that means is once the LDO is in place and confirmed by the local planning authority, it means that developers can come forward more quickly to build out buildings and to therefore create the jobs and economic opportunities that arise from that. Any development on the local development order area must align with what the LDO says. So the LDO will set specific parameters, specific levels of the amount of buildings that can take place, and any development that comes forward must align to that. as it says in the notes there is an alternative provision, so a separate planning application could be submitted, but that's wholly a new exercise and would be subject to the normal planning application process. So based on what you'll see here today, any buildings that are built on the site would have to be built in accordance with the local development order as it will be approved. As part of the LDO, there will also be a design guide. So that would give specific details on what the buildings could look like. As I said, their height, but also design characteristics. And there'll be something called a statement of reasons, which provides the technical explanation as to why the scheme is acceptable having regard to planning matters, but also environmental considerations. So things like transport, ecology, and so on. And again, we'll start to talk to you in a bit more detail about those matters as we go through the presentation. Firstly, now I'm going to hand over to Carl, who's going to talk to you about the design and just take you through the approach that we're bringing forward and describe the buildings in a little more detail.
Okay, thanks very much, Kevin. So good evening, everybody, and thanks for coming along at this kind of late hour in the day to listen to us and find out about Somer Valley. To us, it's a very exciting and interesting project, and hopefully you'll find this very informative, and learn lots, and get used to what the proposals are. My name's Carl Burford. I'm a director and partner at AHR. We're architects and master planners. And our job is to provide the overall vision alongside our client Baines, and produce a master plan and produce the design guides Kevin's just mentioned. And those design guides will kind of cover materials, massing, maybe texture as well, colour, and all the important things of what things look like. So they give a kind of parameter and guideline for people to come along and develop later. On screen now, you can obviously see the site outline, which represents, the red line represents the LDO planning application boundary, which would come forward. There's a few areas here and there which would be nuanced and tweaked, but generally that's the red line area we're working to at the moment. Next slide, please. So constraints, there's a series of slides now looking at constraints and opportunities, which then lead into some slides on concepts. So we allow and wish the site to inform our concepts. So we don't bring our concepts to overlay the site, it's the other way around. So what's there now starts to inform how the master plan develops. And it's obviously same with any sites, various constraints. And obviously we also try and turn those constraints into opportunities and provide something good and good benefits to the site and the overall proposals. So the site itself, you can see the A362 there at the bottom, which is on the south side of the site in blue. And the top side of the site, you can see some numbers which give us some levels, but generally the first point of constraint is just the levels in the site, which drop down approximately 19-20 meters from the top to the bottom, although it is over quite a large distance and is quite achievable to develop on a gradient of 1 in 35, which it turns out to be. The site is orientated very well with a kind of axis. You can see bottom right, the north point on the image. So we're orientated north-south, which is very, very good for buildings which need windows like offices and so on. So any south elevation is easier to control if it's directly south, so it works really well. North elevations need less solar control, so it works really well. So we're quite lucky there. As I said earlier, we like to kind of work with existing ecology and hedgerows. So first of all, we look at the field patterns, try and retain those as much as possible, certainly all the high value ones, and work within that and allow those existing hedgerows to dictate where development plots are, rather than just taking out all hedgerows first of all and having a clean slate. We don't like to do that. We like to work with the site. It's obviously very important, and what that allows is for biodiversity to be retained and enhanced. Less work, and obviously a lot of the trees and hedgerows have been there for a long time and deserve to be retained. There's some public rights of way which run through the south to the north on the east side of the site, which will be obviously retained. There might be some realignment needed, we're not sure yet at the top, but overall the public rights of way will be greatly enhanced, and you'll see that on some of the later slides as how we link that into new public ways around the entire site. On the top of the site, there are some overhead power lines running north to south. Some of those are high voltage, so we can't do a lot with those. They have to remain. That they kind of cut the top left-hand corner off. It doesn't show up on this slide, shows up on a later slide. So that provides an easement underneath where we can't build. So that's a really definite constraint. You can't build underneath it, and that dictates some of the plot orientation and configuration. The lower voltage power lines, which run north to south, can be undergrounded, i.e. put under a road. Out the way, so obviously visually much prettier to look at without the overhead power lines. So that's the intention which you'll see later. Access into the site from the A362. There's not many points we can get into the site, so that is a constraint that we feel with some of the proposals you'll see later. The access and traffic will be greatly improved, and the overall intention is to make traffic more free flowing, but there'll be a lot more about that later. There's some residences around the site, of course, which you'll know, and I'm sure some of the neighbours are online tonight, and so it's a constraint. We need to respect those neighbours. We need to make sure we build far away from them, enhance their setting as best we can. And on the far right hand side, you've got Wicks and a couple of other buildings, Porton House, etc., which although they're not residences, we still need to respect those and ensure we don't detrimentally affect them at all. So if we just move on to the next slide, please. So we're kind of currently looking at the site investigation, so across the entire site. Firstly, the landscape visual impact assessment. So we've commenced that, and what that is kind of quite a complex thing, really, where we have to model a much wider area and really understand the effect of development could have on views and the current existing landscape. So a full LVIA, landscape visual impact assessment, is being undertaken, and it will inform our process, and that it ensures things like massing, colour, views, sightlines and so on are respected, and we know where to put our buildings, we know what colour the building should be, we know how the mass will affect things and height and so on. So we're kind of halfway through that process at the moment. There's a very particular way of doing it. It's quite complicated, but it is very informative. We're also undertaking many ecology surveys, and most of those on the list have already been undertaken, and that's also informing the way we propose to develop the site. And of course, most ecology does occur in hedgerows and trees and so on, so that's another great excuse for keeping those. I say all those surveys have been undertaken now, plus a series of surveys on ground conditions as well, which will be undertaken to inform this process. Next slide, please, Ellie. So some of the kind of opportunities where we're trying to look at the constraints and see how we can make that a benefit for the site. So using the levels greatly informs, alongside the LVIA, where we put taller buildings. We don't want to put really tall buildings on the A362, which really kind of block and dominate the road. So we have slightly shorter or smaller footprint buildings towards the front. We don't want really large buildings or tall buildings at the back of the site where they might break the skyline and so on. So the taller buildings start to go into the middle of the site, towards the back, but within the middle. That starts to set out how we orientate and organise the site. As I said earlier, the retention of the existing higher value hedgerows is really paramount to how we've developed the master plan, and you'll see that in a moment. In places we have to remove some of the lower value hedgerows or just gaps in them to ensure we can kind of traverse the site. But again, that's the lower value ones. And on top of all of that, we're really trying to enhance the site by providing extensive ecology routes around the site, which you'll see shortly. The public right of way, in the blue dash lines to the top of the image there. There might be some realignment of one because of various constraints, but probably not actually. I think we get away with just keeping those exactly as they are, but then they'll be linked to all these new footways, which you'll see in the slide in a second. The A362, to get into the site, we want to kind of manage that better. improve traffic movement. So there's a proposal to provide a new wider road and roundabout fully within the site, which you'll see shortly. And then major opportunity, of course, to provide really sensitive massing and landscaping and additional landscaping around existing residences where they could adjacent to the site or opposite the A362. So, we really have to take heed of those, and also respect how we build close to the retail and office properties to the east. And then biodiversity, it's very difficult when what seems to be like just a big green site, how you increase and improve biodiversity across the site. There is obligations to increase biodiversity. So we really have to work really hard. And a lot of that is to do with the value of ecology and the value of some of the existing sites. Sometimes, although it might all look green, actually the value quite often is quite low because not a lot grows there or not a lot lives there. So we really work hard and improve that to provide a higher quality of vegetation, hedgerows, and green space. And we're currently on track to provide a 10% increase in biodiversity across the site, all on site. So we don't have to go off site, because some developments to meet their 10% target have to go and provide ecology improvements off site because they can't do it on their own site, which we really don't like that. So we like to do it on our site, and at the moment we're on target to do that, which is a great success. Next slide, please. So there's a series of plans which makes sense in the end when they all kind of build up, but we kind of take each element of the proposals of the concept to show you how it kind of grows into the master plan. So ultimately, we like master plans to look obvious at the end. Of course, it's that way because that's the way the site is. And you can see here the existing landscape hedgerows and trees. So that's all the trees and hedgerows on the site at the moment, and how grayed out in the background, you can see the master plan developing, and that will become more visible as we go along. But here's a series of green structural landscape. It's there now. We'll be keeping that. And that will eventually link into what we've called a park within a park, some kind of real big landscape features. Next slide, please. So the road here, so the new road you can see is wholly within the red line. So we move away from all the existing properties on the A362. The roundabout there is to improve and enhance traffic flow to ensure we can have a proper junction into the site, and it doesn't hold traffic up, and there will be more on that later. Then obviously it links to a central access which runs through the centre of the site and links to each plot, as you'll see developing at the moment. And that's the ideal position to put our undergrounded low voltage cables, so they go within the road and the footways which run north to south along that access road. Next slide, please. Structural landscape. So this is new stuff. So around the perimeter of the site, we're intending to put more trees, more hedgerows, and this links to 360-degree footways around the whole site and linkages to pedestrian routes across the site, which you'll see in a second. So that's kind of strengthening the boundary. It's strengthening and making more pleasant that walkway and that cycleway around the site, but also providing buffer zones. You can see bottom left here where there are existing properties next door. So we're providing more structured planting to improve the environment, make sure there is that space between development and existing properties. Enhanced biodiversity, of course, as well. Also on the right-hand side, you can see where it links through to some of the public right-of-ways as well. There's more trees and improvements to the ecology areas around the whole perimeter of the site. Next slide, please. Oops. No, back one, sorry. That one, yeah. So in the centre of the site, what we're very keen to do is kind of divide the site into two. And this is for various reasons. One, we see the kind of more industrial uses to be to the north, so to the top side of that green strip, and to the right side, so to the underside, to the south side, we've got more office uses and so on, which you'll see. And also very keen to not just have it as like a 1970s business park. This is something which will be, we hope, really exciting and really interesting and really useful to the community. So across the site from left to right to east to west, or west to east, we've got this, we call it loosely park within a park. We want a better name than that, but we can't think of one at the moment. But it's a large area which subdivides the site into two and allows, and Ellie, you might be able to try and trace it a little with your mouse here, so that there can be a circular route from the front of the site around the new roads, which then link through to pathways through this park within the park. So there could be smaller circular routes. So if you want to go for a walk in the morning from one of the existing towns, you can go around a smaller circuit on the left hand side or the right hand side or the entire south side of the site, or it also links to a bigger circular route around the whole site, which allows cycles and pedestrians to get around the whole site. So it's a dog walking place. It should be interesting, full of ecology and so on. And as a central feature, you can see just off the kind of east to west bit, as we drop down to the south towards the roundabout, there's a few other green features here. And this is space where we've encapsulated existing trees and some of that ecology to ensure, one, we retain it, but two, we kind of extend the ecology links, but also providing where that little circular space is, just off the east to west green park. I can't see where your mouse is, but the circular zone in the middle, yeah. This is a space for community use, where we're not quite sure what's going to happen there. So it's a space that can be overtaken by the community in terms of seating areas and so on, and even mini performances, etc. But it's a nice place for obviously the new workers from the park and also from the existing communities coming in, the sandwiches and so on, because it's a nice thing for your lunchtime to walk away from your workplace if you're located on this site, to go and eat your lunch somewhere and basically sit within a nice landscaped area with public realm around it. Next slide, please. So these are some of the footways, and some are more formal. So the ones either side of the access route, which goes north to south at either side of the road, more formal pavements, as you'd all kind of expect in a kind of business park. But going around the perimeter of the site, and it kind of stops and starts because in our image here, it goes under trees and so on. So it looks a bit odd, but it's a continuous route all the way around within that red line. And there's the wider route around the entire site, and we should measure to know how long that is, but you'll probably get your 10,000 steps in just by going around that perimeter. But you can do shortcuts and do left to right and go around each quadrant. So continual routes around the whole site, and we're really keen for the community to use these. So in areas there'd be some steepness, of course, I'm sure. If you're on a bike, it might be a bit difficult, but generally and those footways will connect to the footways within the new highway, and also new crossings which then link down to the towns. There'll be a little bit more about that later, and we really do hope people will come and use that linear park within the park in the centre and find it really interesting. We've also linked some of the attenuation. So for those who don't fully understand that, obviously it rains in this country quite a lot. So to control that, water needs to go somewhere. In the old days, we just put it down pipes into the sewers and away it go. And as you know, the country finds it quite difficult to deal with that amount of water. So now we try and control it in a much more natural way, either with tanks under car parks, so it will gradually seep away within those tanks, or more naturally through attenuation ponds in features. So along the east to west zone, there will be some attenuation features which will allow water to sit in that at times. Be very pleasant to sit around those as well, just to drain the site properly. And the full extent of our solutions there, not fully developed, but we're kind of midway through seeing how we can do that in the best and most interesting way, really. Next slide, please. So once we've got the perimeter footways, the access road, the structured landscaping, the public round, the new park within the park, the linear park, the community features, the entrance areas, the existing hedgerows, the existing trees, that leaves the development zones left. So these are the areas we can safely develop. That's not to say we can fill those white spaces with buildings. You've still got certain parameters we need to respect, of distances from existing properties, distances from each other, and so on, let alone the heights, etc. But those white areas there, or grey areas, represent the area you can safely develop without affecting ecology, etc., and still allowing, as you can see, quite a lot of green space across the site. On the top right hand area, you can see a green space, so just to the left there, so this is a biodiversity area, so obviously it's there now. This is where the public right-of-ways kind of crisscross a little bit, and we think we might have to move them slightly, but we'll probably get away without doing that, I think, in retrospect. But at the moment, we see that as another nice green area where you can go. It could have, meadows, a meadow field to it, and so on, which links up the various parts of the pathways which circumnavigate the site. So go on to the next slide, which then starts to kind of think about what those plots are. And this represents the vision. So an LDO does provide some flexibility on where things go. It doesn't totally fix every single use, but there will be a design guide. There is a vision of where things should go. And just to explain some of those, firstly, more industrial uses go to the rear of the site, past that linear part within a park to the north, and to the front, it's more uses where you have more frequent pedestrian kind of access to, and so on. So P1 and P2, pink and orange on the bottom right there. So that's where we see a pub and a hotel going. So linking to new crossings across the A362, the pub and the hotel, the pub is in P1 and the hotel is in P2. Both of those uses need to be seen from the main road because they kind of survive on some passing trade, but also it's a nicer place to kind of sit outside in kind of a controlled public realm area, external seating area at the front of the site rather than into the depth of the site. So we think it's the most appropriate area. P4 to its left, we see is that F&B, which is food and beverage, restaurant use, small use there, which are all linked to P1 and P2. So very highly accessible from Midsummer's Norton and the other towns, and crossings and bus stops as well. P3 behind that, we see that as in green, we see that as trade counter distribution, providing facilities for local businesses and obviously the residents locally. Sui generis means something which doesn't have a planning designation, doesn't kind of fit into one of the uses, and those more technical on the call understand that some planning designations of B8 and C1 and so on are a specific reference commonly used by professionals, but sui generis kind of fits in the middle of it. And at the moment, we don't know what each of these buildings are going to exactly look like, but there will be design codes dictating height and materials and so on. So we do want to control what it looks like. Across the road onto P5 and P6, this is where we see kind of office and flexible workspace using. So that could be straightforward offices, but it also could be co-working space where you've got either multi-tenanted uses within a building or desk space within buildings, whichever, what the market kind of demands, but also potentially combining kind of workshops with office space as well. So quite flexible of a lower height to the front, set back from the boundary. When we cross back to the north of the site, past the linear park, we have P7, which is industrial use, thank you, and then P8 to its right, which is again that kind of hybrid between flexible workspace and industrial, again reasonably interchangeable with P7. P12 at the top behind that is potential for depot space. That's where we've got the high voltage cables running overhead, so we can't build very much there, so it's kind of open space, so it could be for depot space. P12 kind of connects to that, and then P9 more industrial space as is P11, and then P10 kind of going clockwise here into the center, it would be storage and distribution in the center there, so slightly lower than the kind of height, full height of the site. I think that covers all of those. And then if we go to the next slide, please. So then we put buildings on it, and these are illustrative. The colours represent heights, which you'll see later on, not necessarily, obviously don't represent the colours of the buildings. The shape of the buildings, the shape of the roofs and so on are kind of shown through experience, what they might look like, but of course, other things could come forward, but there will be design codes controlling height to eaves, some height to ridges, materials. We're very keen on colour palette. So the LVIA will bring a colour palette up of, because there's so much countryside around that, it'll be kind of muted, probably autumnal colours and so on. So nothing too bright. And those colour palettes can be incorporated in the design guides to inform any developments coming through to mirror those colours. So you can see, I won't go through every building again, but you can see where they're located, with the hotel and the pub to the right there, with the F&B, food and beverage unit to the right, to the left, industrial to the rear, and then offices generally of sorts to the left-hand side to the west. And you can see how they all entwine with the linear park within a park, which goes from east to west, and the kind of that public round of the ecology zones and community areas, which come down the centre. Next slide, please. So that's just the quantum. Won't go through into all the detail of the different numbers there, but we can always come back to that. So it's also on the website as well. But you can see the proportion between industrial at the top, it's kind of half. And then the office space is about a third, and then other uses make up the difference there. Next one, please. So 2 or 3 just different views from the model. We've also got a animation which we're hoping will work, which we'll show you in a second, which these slides are taken from. But from the top here, you can see the real importance of that linear part within the park running left to right in the centre of the slide. With the attenuation, and then you can see all the light coloured pathways around the perimeter within that kind of red line. So they're linkages through tree-lined routes, which you can walk around, take your dog around, cycle around, and so on, and really kind of links it to the wider environment. And we'd really hope the community use those. Next slide, please. So a view from the southeast. Again, you can see the pub and the hotel on the bottom there. And you can also start to see how all the heights and the massing work. This model might look flat, but it's not flat. It's actually modelled at the real gradients. So you can just about see and perceive the site going, rising up from far left up to far right. And how the kind of the buildings nestle in within landscape and respect, kind of located at respective kind of distances away from existing buildings. Next one, please. So from the southwest here, you've already seen this one really. So you can again see those pathways running around, and then perhaps straight to the next slide. So on building heights, this can be a little bit confusing. The numbers on the image, so the 2s and the 3s are the numbers of stories and so on, whereas the colors relate to the key on the bottom right, which is heights, because it's always a bit misleading looking at numbers of stories, because obviously a warehouse generally is 1 story but might have some mezzanine in it, whereas a single-story office or 2-story office would be of a significantly different height. So you kind of have to look at both things, the number of stories and the overall heights. And you can see nearly all the buildings are below 10 to 12 metres. There's only one slightly taller than that, which we see as an office scheme in the centre of the site, just to the left of the access road going up. All the rest are reasonably low, and you'll see a slide in a second where we've kind of related these to some of the existing buildings. To the front, you can see buildings are set back from the road anyway, and are of a reasonable low height as well to the front. And this all needs to run through with the landscape visual impact assessment I've mentioned a couple of times. So the overall assessment process is, when we look at the wider model of the wider area, is how these heights and this massing fit into that. You know, we don't like to break skylines and so on. We like to keep things down. We've got to look at existing tree heights and so on. So on the massing, that, you know, that starts to get nuanced and informed by that process. We're only kind of halfway through that, really. At the same time, the LVA will start to inform other things like colours and textures, etc. Next slide, please. So this is a site section. So you can see Wicks on the far left, and then the site rises up to plot 11, which is one of the industrial sites at the rear of the site on the north side. You see Poulton House there, which is at 9 meters height, more or less. Its adjacent building is 8 to 10 meters to eaves, and as the site rises, you know, the adjacent buildings are similar. So without re-talking about the LVIA, you know, this will be informed by that and will be nuanced by it. But at the moment, everything kind of nestles down as low as it can. Obviously, a lot of these building types, the industrial ones, have certain heights which they need to have to work. So that's a limit, but we try and control it with building shape and massing and stuff, and keeping the roofs low and so on. Okay, next slide, please. Which is the animation, which works, which is great. Hopefully you can all see that. So obviously we're looking from the south here. You know where you are now. It's a bit jumpy, but I think it smooths out in a second. You know, keep your eye on all those trees, loads of trees running through the center of the site, around the perimeter. That blue attenuation in the center is not standing water. You know, it's how we attenuate the site. Sometimes we'll have water and sometimes won't. And but will be corridors for ecology throughout the site, and also very usable by the community. You can see the high voltage power lines on the left hand side there. Where we can't build under, so there's depot forecourt space. You can start to see how some of the plot landscape also works around the car park as well, because we see those as green as we can. Thank you, and then on to the next. So introduce Ed, who leads the transport and highways element here, and he'll talk you through that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Carl, and good evening, everyone. Now I'm going to talk to you about transport and highways, and I'll describe where we are at with our transport assessment and the design of the transport elements of the project. Now, in order to bring forward the development in a way that's consistent with transport policy, it's important we assess carefully the impact of the proposed development, while also, and this is key, supporting sustainable travel choices wherever we can. So for that reason, we're preparing a comprehensive transport assessment, which is a particular type of document which is made for planning applications. And we're considering the impacts of the proposed development in lots of different areas and in lots of different ways. The information which we're looking at as we do that is very broad. We're looking at information that's publicly available and accident data and other planning applications nearby. But importantly, we've also collected traffic data for the study area, both before the COVID-19 pandemic and also after, quite recently in November 21. And the scope of that transport assessment, we haven't just gone away and started doing it. We've engaged with the Highways Authority in Baines, also the Highways Authority in Somerset, with the local bus company, with Design West, and with WECA as well. So I mentioned that we're working through our transport assessment at the moment. It wouldn't be right to say we're finished, but I can certainly share our interim findings with you. Those findings are numerous, but I've placed a summary on the right-hand side of this slide in the orange table, and that really groups together the main topics for discussion that we'll go through today. So first of all, We know we need to encourage access by sustainable modes. It's the right thing to do in terms of the climate emergency and the priorities for the council. It's also the right thing to do and something we must do to be consistent with planning policy. More specifically, we need to support improved bus facilities in the vicinity of the site. We know that it's hard to cross the road near to the site. Crossing provision is poor, so we've identified we need to improve that. And of course, the A362 we know is a busy road. We know it suffers from congestion at certain times, and there's inconsistent speed limits and lots of bends in the vicinity of the site. So that's a subject we're looking into in great detail as well. Finally, the thorny issue of traffic congestion. That we've got a slide towards the end of my section, and we'll go into describing what work we're looking at specifically in relation to congestion away from the site. But we know that's really important to get right, and we also know that, again, to be consistent with planning policy, we have to assess it properly and make sure we're not having significant or unacceptable impacts. So the next slide would be good to bring up, if that's okay. So the left-hand side of this panel, of this table, is the same as what we just talked through, the issues. I'm now able to talk to you about the right-hand side of this table, which is what we plan to do about those issues. So running from top to bottom, we're preparing a travel plan, and that will guide and influence people, employees and visitors as they visit the site when it's actually in operation, to make more sustainable choices when they travel. We're committing to new walking and cycling connections to the Norton Radstock Greenaway to the east, and we're providing significant volumes of EV charging spaces for those electric vehicles, which are increasingly making up more and more of the fleet. I mentioned the bus waiting areas. We are introducing improved bus stops and real-time information for users, and we introduce safe crossing points into the site. We're reviewing the speed limit, as I said, and that's specifically at Farrington Gurney, where it changes from 30 to 40 to 30 quite quickly, and we feel that could be smoothed out. Now onto that traffic point again. We know there's an issue at Sunnyside, and we've got a plan in a moment which will show exactly where I'm referring to, but that's where vehicles have to give way to one another somewhat unnecessarily because the road's just that little bit too narrow, and we seek to address that through some minor widening there. And we plan to remove the bends in the road near to the site and make that alignment consistent with standards, safer, and at the same time providing access to the spheres, which Carl talked about earlier. Finally, traffic congestion, that final row in the table. We are examining the road network. We know there's some areas of concern, and we're zooming in on them, but we're also looking at lots of other areas in the vicinity, and I'll show a plan of that later. So perhaps we could have the next slide, please. This appears to be a little bit grainy now, but running from left to right, I'm simply going to describe the proposals and where they sit in the vicinity of the site. So to the left, that green T, we expect when we've completed our traffic assessment, there may be a need to improve the function of that signalised crossroads at Farrington Gurney. The red oblong next to that is the speed limit point that I described earlier. That might be, we hope, something of a quick win, and could make the speed limits more consistent, and then therefore people would comply with them more easily. The yellow shape just to the east of the red one, that's the pinch point. Sunnyside is the term we're using, and that's where traffic is giving way to oncoming traffic in a way that slows vehicles down and it really isn't an optimal arrangement. So it's something we know that we can fix as part of the proposals. Now looking to the spheres and the immediate sort of frontage of the spheres, where that pink blob is, that's the road improvement scheme which was on plan earlier, and it straightens out the road. It provides new crossing points for pedestrians, and it provides new bus stops as well. And from that point, it's possible to provide, as we propose to do, improved walking and cycling linkages to the east, going over the roundabout in blue, in that blue shaped to the east of the drawing. That's Thicket Mead, where at that location, we anticipate, but we don't know for sure yet, that there may be some congestion issues that we will need to examine in some detail. So that's the location of those proposals that I spoke about a moment ago. Perhaps we could move on to the next slide. This is more context than it is specifically part of our proposals. The CRSTS, which stands for the City Regional Sustainable Transport Settlement, is a much wider project. It's a strategic in nature project focused on sustainable transport measures, and that's being led by the West of England Combined Authority and obviously cooperating with Bath and North East Somerset. And that seeks to improve, again, at a more strategic level, trips across the region, along the A37, the A367, and importantly, very importantly for us, along the A362. Outside of our site, you can see the red blob there. So as part of that scheme, the WECA is proposing to improve bus priority in the area and also build new walking and cycling links, and that can only be a benefit to the SFES insofar as both coming online potentially to similar timescales. We are working with WECA on that and cooperating where we can. Could we have the next slide, please? I've got a slide now which is specifically about car parking, and we just wanted to set out that, you know, when you've seen those aerial images and plans that Carl presented earlier, there is car parking on the site, because obviously whatever we do in terms of supporting sustainable transport measures, there will still be a need for some people to drive. Some people, that is their way of traveling, and they must. And in other cases, that is going to remain a convenient way of traveling. Car parking is a difficult issue to get right, and we understand that we need to strike a balance. We're striking that balance between making sure that there's not so much car parking that space is wasted and that people are encouraged to drive because it's far too easy to do so and it's a very convenient thing to do, but also we don't want to put in too little and then have parking that's too scarce and you've got problems in the site and potentially even overspill. So in order to get that balance right, we've reviewed the adopted policy for the council area and benchmarked across the region and other local authorities that have their own policies to try and make sure we're getting that right. At the moment, we're forecasting between 750 and 790 spaces, but we've got further reviews to do with more guidance coming out shortly from the local authority. And as part of that, we commit wherever we can that the car parking is efficiently used, so spaces are shared by different uses if that's possible to do so. Finally, on this slide, EV charging is obviously going to be a very important thing in the future, and it is increasingly so. At the moment, we're committing to 20% of those parking spaces being provided with EV charging facilities. And again, that's reflective of the emerging policy for this area. So if we move on to the next slide, please. This slide just draws in some of the matters regarding public rights of way. Carl mentioned them earlier. We just wanted to show them on the plan here to reassure those of us on the call that public rights of way will be retained and treated with respect. We know that they're very important, have historical importance, go back a long way, and that's how they were formed. And so the red lines there show the public rights of way and how they pass through the site. Yellow dotted line are the routes around the site that Carl described earlier. We hope that it's clear that there's good connection between those different types of routes. So if we move on to the next slide, this is my final slide, I think, and it relates to transport modelling, which can be quite a difficult subject to describe in brief. But ultimately, I want to reassure the group that when I'm talking about assessing the impacts on traffic, I'm talking about assessing it in detail. We're using this tool called Visim, which is a very detailed and smart piece of software which can model the impact not just at junctions but on links and the interaction between those junctions and links and roads across a whole study area. And our study area is everything in orange on that plan. And we've agreed that with the local authority. They think that the local highway authority, I should say, they think it's the right thing to do, and we agree to assess that wider area and make sure that there aren't any unusual impacts or obvious impacts that are going unaddressed. That work is underway, so we don't have a final answer on where those impacts will need to be mitigated, but we'll come back and obviously share as part of the LDO what mitigation is required. And we'll bring that forward, we hope, in a way that it supports sustainable travel still, but also recognises that it's important that traffic flow continues to operate as smoothly as it can, given the context of the study area. Can I just check that that is the end of the transport slides? Yes, thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing if there's any questions on that towards the end.
Thanks, Ed, and thanks, Carl. Thanks, Kevin. I'm very conscious of time. That's taken a little longer than anticipated, but I think it was important to just close that out and allow the detail to be discussed. I'm going to spend I'm going to kind of fly through this benefit slide quite quickly, but I think, again, it's important that we get this across. So just in terms of granting an LDO, it will bring an array of benefits. So firstly, we're looking really at delivering a growth which is sustainable through the SVES development, which is very much around about sustainable development in terms of sustainable in terms of its construction phase, in terms of targeting net zero carbon, and sustainable in terms of its operation, again targeting net zero carbon in the operation of the buildings. We're creating 1,300 new jobs for local people, which is again really key in terms of that out commuting point, and around 40,000 square meters of commercial floor space, which is very much needed in terms of demand terms over the medium term in the Somer Valley. We'll provide flexibility to ensure that the development that comes forward is viable, but is also deliverable, and that's what the LDO allows us to do. It also helps us to more swiftly bring forward regeneration. The nature of the LDO, as Kevin set out, avoids delays in development, because developers can, in due course, whoever that may be, it could be the council, it could be private sector, can develop the sites more quickly, because they can get straight on once the LDO is in place. It's going to encourage connected networks for walking and cycling, as Ed's just alluded to, through those active travel links into the public rights of way, into existing walking and cycling routes to the east and to the and hopefully in due course to the west. I'll come on to that because some questions are coming up in the chat. And it will also be, as Carl has very helpfully set out, a really strong quality public space that's accessible to everybody, not just those on the enterprise zone. That park within a park concept is really important. Balanced car parking approach, again, as Ed has just referenced, and as I mentioned, efficient, sustainable, low energy buildings targeting net zero in operation. And again, through the BNG, we're looking to enhance existing green areas and wildlife corridors through that biodiversity net gain point, which again Carl referenced. We're looking at targeting 10% biodiversity net gain, which is a policy requirement. And as Carl said, all of that is looking to be delivered on site. Again, something that is quite an achievement. Again, the architecture will be characterful, and we're looking for your feedback on that. We'd like to understand what you would like that to look like in terms of the architecture of the space and how it appears. And then lastly, we're looking to deliver those ancillary supplementary uses which help to provide a vibrant site. So that's the food and beverage, the pub and the hotel uses. Next slide, please, Ellie. This is just a really quick timeline slide. Again, very conscious of time on the presentation. from the left to the right, it shows where the project started at the back end of 2020. We've done an awful lot of work in the time between then and now. We are now at that public engagement point, which is the red column. That's today. We've undertaken the master planning development work, the ecology, the pre-app work with the local authority, the vision modelling work, which is ongoing, and the highways design work, which has started. Later on this year, back end of this year, Q3, the LDO will be submitted. It will take account of all your input. That's really important. This engagement is key. We really want to hear from you. We want to have you understand what's good, what you like, where you'd like to see some improvement. We want to hear all of that. That's really vital to the process. But towards the back end of the year, there'll be another opportunity for consultation through the formal LDO submission, and then the LDO itself will be determined towards the back end of 2022. Ellie, next slide, please. So again, this is possibly one of the most important slides on the presentation. We really do want to hear from you. This is a really important scheme in the Somer Valley. It's a kind of once in a lifetime opportunity, and therefore your feedback into this proposal is really timely, and we want to make the most of that. You can engage in a number of ways, but particularly I won't run through this in too much detail, but as I said, the website is already live. That link in due course, when you get into the website or onto the PowerPoint, will take you will take you through to our Baines website. There will be presentation boards, as I said, for those people who can't access easily the internet or don't have access to it at all. Then we will have presentation boards, as I said already, at Midsummer Norton Library from tomorrow, from Radstock Library from next week, and from Poulton Library from tomorrow as well. And the survey will run for a period of 6 weeks, so it runs from today until the end of June. So there's plenty of time for you to get involved, plenty of mechanisms and ways for you to get involved. I would really encourage you to go and have a look at the website that we've set up, and to review this presentation again. I think there's a lot of really good content in it. But if you do have any more questions, there's also an email you'll see there at the bottom of the slide, and a phone number you can call. And if there is no, and that phone number will take you through to Jones Lang, LaSalle, and they will deal with your inquiry. And if you're not able to speak to someone immediately, you can leave a message and then someone will get back to you. Last slide, please. And that is it. That's the end of our presentation. Thank you, everybody. I'm conscious it's now 8:05, so we've got about 25 minutes to take questions. And I'm very happy to start with that. Perhaps if we can pass on to Sarah now, and she could perhaps provide us with some initial questions that we can respond to.
Thank you, Richard. What I've done is I've collated some of the questions that are coming in through the chat, and also the questions that we received ahead of the webinar this evening. So I've got some general questions about the development, if that's okay. So I've got 2 questions, if that's all right. One is, why are the council keen to build on greenfield sites when there are large areas of industrial space that would benefit from redevelopment? And a clarification on the site boundary. There was a question very early on about where there was not a second, was there not a second smaller area on the Tesco side of the road? So those are the first 2 questions.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. I'll deal with the second one first, if I may, and then I'll come back and invite Richard Dayon, who's Deputy Head of Planning at Baines, to pick up on the first question that was being submitted. So the second point, I suspect that comment relates to a separate site across the way that sits adjacent to the Old Mills estate development, which is allocated and in the ownership, as I understand it, of Old Mills. So that is an allocated site that may well come forward in due course for development. It does not form part of the Somer Valley Enterprise Zone itself. So I hope that's responded to that question. If I have not got that correct, then please raise that separately, and we will deal with that in more detail. But Richard, may I bring you in to respond to the first part of the question, which was why the council keen to build on the greenfield sites when there are large areas of industrial space that would benefit from redevelopment?
Yes, thank you, Richard. I mean, it is a really good question, and the council, does seek to prioritise the reuse of suitable and available brownfield land for development where it can. However, I suppose the short answer really is that there isn't sufficient brownfield land, or in this case industrial land, to meet all of our needs. So some greenfield sites are needed for development. And I do think it's important just to note again, as you picked up in the presentation, that the enterprise zone, the site has been allocated in the local plan for many years, since around 2007. And this effectively means the principle of employment development on the site has been agreed. So the LDO is really about delivery and delivering it in the best way possible. I think, again, going back to the presentation, the enterprise zone allocation is a critical part of the spatial strategy for the Somer Valley. And that's a strategy that seeks to provide new opportunities for local employment, partly, as we've already said, to counteract or reduce the high levels of out commuting, thereby, also reducing carbon emissions, which is clearly an important objective. The strategy also recognises that some of the area's older industrial sites are no longer suitable or feasible for continued employment purposes. And so the local plan, the strategy has allowed for some of those to be redeveloped for a mix of uses, whilst others, it seeks to ensure they are improved for continued industrial use where possible. But the point again is, just going back to the early part of the answer, the land on the existing industrial sites just is not sufficient to meet the demand for new space and provide the necessary local jobs. So therefore, in order to provide those new employment opportunities, we do need to ensure more land is available for modern employment development, and that does include greenfield sites. And again, to cut it short, the Somer Valley Enterprise Zone, does provide that best opportunity.
Thank you, Richard. That's great. Sarah, do you want to provide us with the next question, please?
Yeah, sure. So we've got two questions about other sites in the area. So one question was, how does this project affect planning application parcel 9176 Old Mills Industrial Estate expansion, which has just serviced once more? And there's also a question about Welton Bag site. It's been unoccupied for years, so why not develop it?
Okay, I might invite in a second Richard back in to talk on both of those. We are not party to, the Somer Valley Enterprise Zone Development Scheme is not linked in any way to the Old Mills scheme. There is a significant demand for industrial space in the Somer Valley required. There's a significant amount of, or there's a real lack of small space, and as I understand it, if it's the application that was in previously, which was submitted, then I think the site is looking to bring forward lots of smaller scale light industrial units, probably about 750 to about 2,000 square feet. Anecdotally, there is evidence that there are significant long waiting periods to try and get units of that size, particularly in the original Old Mills estate, as I understand it. We've heard that through our key stakeholder group engagement process that has been ongoing for the last 2 years. So I think there's significant demand for that scale of unit. It's very different in terms of type of unit and scale of unit to those which we're looking to deliver on the enterprise zone. But Richard, would you like to come back on that maybe, and maybe whether there's anything you can add to the Welton Bibby Barron conversation?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the Welton Bibby and Barron site, that site is already allocated again in the local plan. It's allocated for mixed-use development, so that's some housing and also some employment uses and potentially some leisure uses as well. That site, isn't actually large enough again to and suitable to accommodate the types of employment uses we're looking to locate on the enterprise zone. But as I say, the primary aspect there is that the site is already allocated for different uses, and as I understand it, the site owners are again looking to prepare a planning application for that mixed-use redevelopment. I don't think I've got anything to add, Richard, to what you said about the land to the south adjoining the Old Mills Industrial Estate.
Thank you, Richard. Sarah, next questions, please.
Thank you. We've got two questions around employment and infrastructure. So one was 1,300 potential new jobs, but 2/3 of those jobs will be low skill, low paid roles. And also, you know, are there any plans for internet connectivity?
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, great questions. We're proposing to deliver 1,300 new jobs. We have had a skills report prepared. I won't run into the detail of that now, because I'm conscious that there are, I think, a lot of questions coming through. I'm very happy to respond to that question offline, and we'll put it onto the website. We'll also respond directly to I think it was I think it might have been Angela who raised that. So very happy to deal with that. There are about 1,300 jobs. There's a really strong mix of managerial and professional jobs we anticipate. So the skills report we've had completed, I think, had circa 28% of the jobs being kind of at managerial or professional level anticipated for the type of sector jobs that we would be delivered. And also, I think over 40% being kind of a medium or of a reasonably high skill set. So those managerial jobs will be NVQ4 and a plus, NVQ4 plus and above, which is essentially degree and above and professional qualification and above. And then the medium level jobs would be, I think, NVQ level 3 and above. So I think the range of jobs looks strong. There are some elementary roles, and we need to provide a blend of opportunity for people, because there'll be plenty of people who won't want necessarily them, but they might want part-time working as well as full-time working. So I think it's a really good question. We are looking at it. We're very conscious of it, but I'm very happy to provide a fuller response separately to that. The other comment in terms of broadband connectivity, as part of the enterprise zone, we will be looking to bring in superfast broadband into the site. So that's certainly something we're looking to deliver. Sarah, next question, please.
Thank you. We've had three concerns from residents about the impact of development. So I'll read the three questions because they all slightly say something slightly different. A resident whose garden backs directly onto the site has asked, can you please reassure us as a family as to what will be built directly behind our house and what will be done to prevent disruption to our family life? We had another question about what will be done to prevent disruption to the front of our house on the main road regarding traffic. And then a further question about the houses along Sunnyside already shake when articulated lorries regularly pass our house. Will the road widening be enough to protect the houses from increased traffic, especially thinking about lorries causing wear and tear on our properties?
Okay, thank you, Sarah. I mean, we recognise that these are really important questions. We may not be able to give you full answers tonight again, but we'd very happy to come back to you. In terms of the questions around the property that backs on to the site, I think we've hopefully demonstrated through the, if I understand the property correctly, I'm hoping we demonstrated through this process that the development moves quite a long way north of your rear boundary, and therefore gives you quite a buffer to the realigned A362 and the roundabout access. But again, please take a closer look at the website, and we'll be happy to provide information directly to you on that. In terms of the front of your property, again, if I think it's the right property, if I've got the right property, the original A362 that you front onto in the location we're talking about, we're expecting that to be closed to general traffic in due course, so that should improve the frontage in terms of the outlook. Sorry, can you remind me of the last? Oh, the Sunnyside. I think again, this is a really key issue. We're looking to ease the flow of traffic at Sunnyside. So at the moment, there's quite a stop-start in traffic, quite a lot of slowing down, accelerating, lorries stopping and starting. We are looking to widen the road slightly there, so that will partly push lorries a little. So we'll have 2 lanes rather than essentially 1 lane. That will move, I suppose, part of the problem slightly further to north, but not significantly. But again, and also in part, the speed limit change should start to sort of limit and standardize the amount of vibration perhaps that's received. Ed, I might ask if you can come back in on that, if that's at all possible, just to add any more context to that.
Yeah, so it gets with vibration and noise associated with HGVs, it gets into engineering territory, quite quickly when you start examining it. We know that there will be widening at Sunnyside because that's something we talked about and that Richard's just reminded us of, and that will in itself improve the flow of traffic, which should reduce stop start and should reduce the amount of accelerating and decelerating, which we know are the loudest parts of the vehicle's journey. But in remaking the carriageway at that point, as we would have to in order to widen it, the engineering team would have to consider defects in the road. They would have to consider falling weight deflectometer testing, which is where they drop a weight to ensure that there's not too much vibration, there's no problems underneath the surface of the road. And there'd also be a review of the carriageway surface and how that surface is interacting with the ground underneath it. So as part of all that work, we would hope that there's a way in which that we could both offset the impact of any additional traffic, but also perhaps examine ways to improve things compared to now. That is an engineering exercise which hasn't started yet. So as I say, we don't have the full answer for you right now, but they're the typical processes that would go through as part of highway and traffic engineering, and we'd apply them in this case too.
Thank you, Ed. Again, I know that's going to be probably quite a key issue. So if we haven't provided sufficient information, we're very happy to respond more fully on that. And I would ask that perhaps you get in contact with us directly or via the website, and we'll try and provide a bit more information and context on that. Sarah, would you like to give us the next question, please?
Sure. Are there opportunities to maximise green build opportunities?
I think the answer to that is, I suppose it depends what you mean by green build. Certainly we are looking to, I don't think we're looking at modular development necessarily, so modular builds coming in, but we will be looking at, in terms of, I mean, we're kind of early in that phase in terms of, I'm not necessarily there in terms of delivery yet by any stretch of the imagination, but we will certainly be looking, and we're targeting net zero carbon in delivery. So that means zero carbon in terms of the construction phase of the scheme. So that's all about the materials that we use that are utilised on site, and the design guides that we set up to help support that delivery. And then also net zero carbon in operation. So where, as far as possible, we're looking at, we're not bringing fossil fuels onto the site. So the site will essentially be powered through electricity, through PVs, through those types of mechanisms. So I think we are responding to the climate emergency. Absolutely, that's something which is very much front and centre for the council. But again, very happy to continue that conversation if that doesn't give you. I mean, we're not quite there yet in terms of that level of detail. But as I say, we are targeting net zero carbon. So I would hope that will give you comfort that as the council, we're responding to the climate and also to the ecological emergency through the biodiversity net gain point with the outcomes from the project. Thanks, Sarah.
We've had a number of questions about the mix of development, so I wondered whether it might be worth just clarifying what the mix of development, the type of business premises, retail uses will be included. Will there be a pub? But there was quite a specific question about the current sort of economic environment that we're in. So I'll read that one out. I understand this development has been discussed for a number of years. We are now in a very different environment since Brexit, pandemic and the war in Ukraine. What current research has been carried out to see what demand there is for large industrial and large office spaces? The UK is currently experiencing a situation where there are more job vacancies than people looking for jobs, and working from home has now become the norm for a lot of people. So the argument for generating jobs appears outdated.
Thanks, Sarah. And that is a really good question, one which we are very conscious of. You'll appreciate that that is something which again is forefront of our mind, is the demand for this kind of space. Occupational demand is something that we have been continuously testing within the team. So within the Arcadis team, we have regular touch points with the commercial agents to understand where demand sits. Pre-pandemic figures demonstrated there was in the region of a 3 to 4% vacancy rate in industrial space in the Somer Valley. which demonstrates very limited supply of space. And we've got anecdotal evidence, as I said earlier on, of people waiting for 3 years to get units of certain business types, particularly at Old Mills, which has got a very particular type of unit that people are looking to access. I think generally industrial and distribution demand remains very strong as the industry looks to move probably towards more specialist manufacturing. There's again evidence that whilst there's a lot of mass manufacture in Asia and in China, there's a move towards more specialist manufacturing in Europe and particularly in the UK, and we're recognizing that there's a real move towards specialist manufacturing in the region, and also the more we shop online and the more we need that last mile delivery, then regional distribution is key. So I think there is definitely evidence of demand. We don't see this, it's not seen by our consultants that this location will be a national distribution hub. That's not the nature of the Soma Valley, but we certainly see it potentially as a more local distribution hub supplying existing businesses in the region. There's also just worth saying we are as a council in the process of creating a new evidence base for a new economic strategy that is coming together at the moment, and we'll be able to report more on that in due course once that economic strategy is developed. I think probably it's worth at this point just mentioning, I know that there has been mention elsewhere of the loss of Dickies. That was mentioned to us previously. I think it came up through the Facebook page, the loss of Dickies out of the Westfield estate. But that was very much more of a decision by the parent company, the American parent company. They decided that the Dickies financial model wasn't for them, and that they pulled out, essentially they pulled Dickies out of the whole of the European, Middle East and African market. So that was a loss of 280 jobs. But it wasn't, that's kind of a bit of a special case, unfortunately, for those people who lost their jobs. But I think the important thing that's worth saying is that the unit was then acquired very quickly by Bridges locally, and they have expanded into that space, which is clearly great news. So I think, again, that just reinforces the demand for space that there is. I think it's also worth saying that SVES will be delivered over the medium term, so that's probably up to sort of 3 to 10 years. So we're looking at supply that meets a future position and not necessarily supply that meets the immediate position now. I think there was a mention around the working from home piece. I think, again, that's really important. You know, a lot of employers are moving towards hybrid models being employed, where people work part of the time from home and part of the time from the office. But there really is, and I've seen this firsthand, clear evidence from employers that a lot of staff want to get back into the office. And it's really a key issue in terms of staff retention and recruitment, that quality space for office occupiers, where people can come in and meet colleagues, and particularly for younger staff is really important. So I think there is a change in the type of space people want, but the requirement for office space is still essential to get people back into a kind of community and social environment where they can learn from their peers, their jobs, but also that they can get out of their own homes. A lot of younger people don't have the benefit of being able to have a space at home that they can work from, and that's something which is causing some concern to a lot of those people. So I think there is definitely a demand for this kind of space going forward, and that hybrid working is here to stay, but also so is the requirement for office accommodation. So did that respond to the points there?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. We've got some questions around heights and visual impact, so I'll take them all together. So there was questions about will the units be restricted to single-storey construction, and can you confirm the height of the tallest proposed building on the site and its position on the development? And then just a question about visual impact. What steps will be taken to reduce the visual impact of the development from local houses, e.g. strategically sited trees, hedges, grasses, mounds, minimal site lighting, focus on the ground, sound barriers, etc.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So I'll try and take those reasonably in order. So in terms of the heights of buildings, well, obviously we've provided some detail on that, or a reasonable amount of detail on that tonight. So I would encourage people to go to have a look at the website and refresh their minds on this, on the presentation. But in terms of the tallest building within the parameter plans we've set at the moment, that I think is the plot 5 office block, which is fairly central in the site, which is shown within the parameter plan of about 3 stories in height, and a height of between 12 to 14 meters for those 3 stories. And then plot 10, which is the larger distribution warehouse, again central to the site, has a height to the eaves of 10 to 12 meters. And I think also we probably demonstrated that the units predominantly won't be single story. They will be kind of probably in the region of 2 to 3 story, but we've been trying to keep the heights down towards the perimeter of the site as much as we can do, because we recognize that we want to try and limit the impact. Carl, I'll probably bring you in here in a sec, if that's okay. And also probably just in terms of the visual impact, Carl, I might ask you to comment on that, but we've obviously developing a scheme which is this park within a park concept. We're looking to maintain existing hedgerows. We've got a significant amount of tree planting within the enterprise zone and to the buffer zones. There are buffer zones to extent around the outside of the scheme, the perimeter of the scheme, and there's buffer planting. And obviously we also have, there'll be a design code, design guide to help people reinforce the type of space that's brought forward and the type of development that takes place on the sites. Carl, did you want to add anything more to that?
Yeah, I think you said most things there, but I think just to reiterate about the LVIA, the LVIA is a complex process which we have to demonstrate to the planning authority through various techniques and clever photography and modelling exactly what massing and building size, etc., is intended to be or is proposed. So if it doesn't work, we won't be proposing it because we won't get planning. So it is a really kind of accurate test of ensuring that heights are kept to the minimum, and we do see that as a constraint. And Richard ran through those heights. Generally, there's only one building, I think, at 3 stories, but the 10 to 12 meters is generally the general height as you go up the site. But importantly, it's all that infrastructure of trees. And although currently our model just shows trees placed and not necessarily randomly, but there's not a lot of technical accuracy yet exactly where we're going to go, because we're going to have a look at what the neighbours can see and what we can see to the neighbours and how far the buildings are, and really kind of try and tune in where trees should be, where buffer zones should be thickened or thinned out and so on, to ensure things can be seen or can't be seen. Not forgetting that some buildings are nice to look at. Let's not forget we are going to be designing to the highest quality here. There will be design codes, and also some uses want to be seen because they need passing trade and so on. So tree buffering, you don't just want to put perimeter trees around the whole thing, because it kind of defeats the object sometimes of making businesses work.
Thank you, Carl. Sarah, I'm really conscious of time. We are at 8:30, and I did say that we would look to end at 8:30. Perhaps we can take one more question, if that's okay. And then what I would say is there are a lot of questions still to be responded to, and thank you for that, because your input and feedback is really important. We will respond to all of those questions. We won't leave you hanging and wondering when you're going to get a response. We will respond to you as soon as possible. But Sarah, perhaps can you give us one more, if there's a relatively swift one, we could try and pick that off.
There's quite a few questions about footpaths, improving footpaths, pedestrian access by Sunnyside, public transport improvements. Will there be bus stops there? But I think probably the one I'll pick is the question about the A362 at Old Mills has an S-bend, which is a traffic pinch point, narrowing and without a pavement, regularly causing large vehicles to stop and crawl to pass. Can you confirm that rerouting the A362 to bypass this is a major part of the planning application? And I think to go on to that, there were some other questions or comments about, that currently what are the plans? What about the little lanes that could be used as rat runs? So the impact that perhaps that has on the sort of surrounding areas and the traffic surrounding the other areas.
Thank you, Sarah. Ed, I'll probably bring you in a sec, but just to try and respond, I'm hoping that we showed fairly comprehensively that the S-bend at the A362 is to be taken out, and we really recognise that has been a consistent problem in the locality for a long time. I've been in the area for nearly 20 years, and all that time it's been an absolute bugbear for a lot of people. So yes, absolutely, we recognise that problem. We've looked to mitigate that by putting in the new access roundabout into the site. In terms of the local access routes, again, we are very much, it's really key that we're very strongly promoting what we call active travel, which means getting on your feet, walking, getting onto your bicycles, and making those links to the enterprise zone. So we have what we call the East Cycle Track, which runs from the enterprise zone back into towards Midsummer Norton and links into the Norton Radstock Greenway. Ed's already mentioned that the WECO through their CRSTS program are also looking at what we refer to in the team as the West Cycle Track. It doesn't sit within our project, but it's definitely very much an option that the WECO are looking at in terms of delivery of that West Cycle Track to get that active connectivity again. In terms of the smaller lanes, we are looking at those in part across the visit modelling work. But Ed, can I invite you in there just to perhaps close that out, and then I think I'll just then close the evening, if I may.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, just on that West Cycle Track, there have been a few other comments I've spotted as I've been scrolling through about that, and I think we could possibly try and share the engagement piece that the WECA have been running on that, so that they've had their own engagement for that project. So we may share that with others for those who have missed it previously. Just picking up that final point which Richard left to me in terms of the potential rat running and smaller lanes within the study area. That orange shape plan that I showed before, where I was demonstrating the study area, yes, it did have a pretty clear focus on the A362, on West Road, on Station Road, and on Radstock Road as well. But it also, and it perhaps less obviously, we have about 45 minor side roads connecting with that we're also looking at and that are included within the study. And so in modelling that study area, we look at those side roads and we make sure that the model that we build reflects the existing situation, so any existing behaviours that you may have touched on. And then latterly, and this is a bit we haven't done yet, is we load in the traffic from the proposed development and we see, actually, do we have any new problems related to perhaps rat running or some other type of problem? And so just to reassure you, yes, we are looking at those minor roads as well and how they connect with the main corridor.
Ed, thank you very much for that. We're at 8:35, and I did say we would aim to finish at 8:30, as I said a moment ago. So we have, can I just assure everybody, thank you very much for your contributions this evening, and thank you very much for listening to us. I know there's a lot of information there, and it's a lot of new information. There will undoubtedly be other questions that come up over time. Please feel free to ask, to raise them. All of the questions that you have raised this evening have been captured, and we will respond to them, and progressively over the next period of time, we will put together a library of responses which will be placed onto the website. So I thank you very much for your time. I'm sure the panel would like to thank you for listening. Thank you to Sarah for holding the questions for us. Thank you to Ellie for being great on the slides and projection. Thank you, Richard, for joining us as Deputy Head of Planning. That's been very helpful. And thank you to Carl, Kevin as well for your time. Very much appreciated. And we look forward to hearing more from you and this engagement really being a positive contribution to the way the scheme goes forward. Thank you very much indeed. And good night. Enjoy the rest of your evening.